When we think about clowns, we usually think about children's birthday parties, laughter, and balloon animals, but we most certainly don't think about murder or sexual assault. John Wayne Gacy was famous for his reputation of dressing up as a clown for fundraisers and children's events, but what wasn't in his job description was murder and sexual assault. Gacy was charged with killing and sexually assaulting 33 young boys and was sentenced to death for 12 of these 33 murders. After spending 14 years on death row, he was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. If you were in charge of his justice, would you sentence him to death? Would you agree that capital punishment selects the worst of the worst and his brutality against humanity justifies his death? Or would you argue that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind? If I was in charge of his justice, I would sentence him to death, as I believe it is a just punishment for his crimes committed against the rights to freedom, safety of the people, and of life. The death penalty has been a controversial topic for a while now, with 19 states in the U.S. outlawing capital punishment and 31 keeping it legal today. Until Roper v. Simmons in 2005, it was legal to execute murderers who were under the age of 18. People who support the death penalty are in favor of its use to prevent people from murdering and sexually assaulting potential victims to begin with. They believe that murderers are deserving of the punishment because they inflicted pain upon the victims and the victims' families. People who oppose the death penalty argue that capital punishment discriminates on racial and wealth factors, as the majority of criminals sentenced to death aren't white and have low income. Many argue that the capital punishment also violates the Eighth Amendment. The capital punishment is very complex and proposes many ethical questions we have hard times finding answers to. With all the horrendous atrocities in the world, we must protect the people. We must protect the innocent, the worthy, and the good doers. If we keep the death penalty, we gain the upper hand. We can terrify murderers the same way that they've been terrifying us. According to Michael Wellner, the chairman of the forensic panel, if would-be criminals undoubtedly knew that they would be put to death should they murder with premeditation, very many of them are much less inclined to commit murder. Capital punishment is the ultimate warning against all crimes. Families of murder victims feel the intense grief and heaviness of their murder on their shoulders. Their grief won't completely fade away with the murderer's execution, but they do feel a sense of relief, knowing that they no longer need to worry about the murder killing anyone else, or that they don't need to think about the tragedy that occurred, which usually doesn't happen when the murderer is still alive. Edward Fazer, an associate professor of philosophy at Pasadena City College, claims that the loved ones of murder victims understand that to sentence killers to less than death would fail to do justice. Presumably, a long period in prison would be grossly disproportionate to the heinousness of the crimes. To bring closure to all the loved ones of the victims is essential in any life that ends in such a violent, devastating way, as well as bringing closure and assurance to the rest of the world that this individual will never lay his hands on anyone again. We as individuals and as a part of society have to recognize our responsibility to rightfully punish those who deserve it. Robert Bleeker, a professor of law at New York Law School, states that we should only execute those who most deserve it, and not randomly, define our death penalty statutes, and review the sentences of everyone in death row. Release into the general population those who don't really deserve to die. The rest we should execute, worst first. Revenge knows no bounds, which is why it is important to limit retribution, as well as be proportional and appropriately directed. Nationally, our prison systems are overcrowded, poorly guarded, and cruel. Although the prison system is meant to try to rehabilitate criminals, prisoners are subjected to torture, rape, beatings, and STDs. If prisoners are released, it is nearly impossible to acquire work because it leads to an increase in poverty because they are not hired. Our prison system is meant to create and improve in criminals, and although they are provided with resources to help them develop new life skills and habits for a better life if they ever do get released, they're still in the toxic environment with other criminals, so it's easy for them to relapse. Putting people in prison for life is torture, and if they're released back into society, crime rate will increase again. So if we're not going to rehabilitate our prisoners, then it seems more logical to sentence the most inhumane and cruel murderers to death. Although those who oppose the death penalty argue that innocent criminals will be killed if the death penalty continues to remain legal, it's just as inhumane to torture and imprison them. Michelle Hennessy, the Deputy District Attorney for the County of Los Angeles, counters this argument by claiming, the innocent can take solace in knowing that a unanimous jury of 12 citizens must render the death verdict after an exhaustive trial, where the accused murderer is represented by 2 highly competent attorneys and overseen by an independent judge who ensures a fair trial. Death penalty opponents argue that capital punishment is racially biased, but Edward Koch, the former mayor of New York City, proves that, in fact, the racial breakdown for deaths since 1977 is 48.6% white and 40.9% black. The race of defendants executed in the U.S. since 1976 is 56% white and 35% black. The discrepancy in the execution rate between blacks and whites is because of juries deciding whether to impose the death penalty in cases in which there were black defendants and other circumstances that favored a lesser penalty. The death penalty should remain legal, as it can prevent criminals from committing murder if they know they will be put to death, brings closure to the loved ones, and keeps the rest of society safe from the murderers, and we can accept our responsibility to punish the wrong. Ultimately, we must put the best interests of society first. The execution of John Wayne Gacy may seem immoral to some, but this is a matter of justice and fact. To let the man who slaughtered over 30 young men and broke the hearts of so many of their loved ones would be more immoral than to keep him alive by reveling in the glory of his own horrors.